Hey guys, my name's Sarah and I have been on the nutritional balancing program for just about 2 months, maybe a little bit longer, and not the full program, just components of the program. So I've been taking it very slow. I have a chronic illness. I've had Lyme disease for 4 years, bedbound about 2 out of the 4 years that I've had Lyme. So the program for me is a little bit of a different experience, probably than your average person, able-bodied person. So I kind of wanted to go over my experience with the program, but first I just wanted to give you a little bit of background from what I've been through illness-wise. So I have this kind of like all written down so I can go through it a little bit because it's a little bit of a complicated story. My health journey started 4 years ago. I was hiking in Colorado and I suddenly had really bad head pressure, nausea, really severe fatigue. It's just out of nowhere, it just hit. And I thought it was at altitude, so I was like, okay, like I'll get better and I'll go home and like work again. Before all this, like, you know, I'm a physical therapist, working full time, went to get my doctorate degree, all that jazz. I was running like 40 miles a week, easily, weightlifting like 2 or 3 times a week. You know, I was extremely active. No problems with food, no problems with dairy, gluten, no gut sensitivity issues at all. So that was before. So since this hiking trip in Colorado, I was having like a couple of like weird numbness, tingling symptoms 3 years prior to hiking in Colorado, but I didn't think much of it, and some more like insomnia, anxiety kind of stuff, but again, I didn't think much of it until this crash in Colorado. So when I went back, I tried to go back to work. I was like, okay, like it's just an altitude thing, the head pressure will go away, you know, I'll feel better when I go home. Well, things got better maybe for a week and then they got worse again when I tried to work. I was extremely sensitive to basically light and noise at work anytime. And it was extremely distracting too. I was trying to do my paperwork and I couldn't do it because whenever somebody, you know, said something or did something, like I would just lose my train of thought and not be able to think of what I was even doing in the first place. So it was extremely hard to work. I got so weak physically that I couldn't push a wheelchair. People had to literally go get my patients for me, bring them back to the room because I didn't have the energy to go get them. I knew it was bad when I actually went to tell somebody who I just saw, a patient that I just saw 15 minutes ago, and I didn't remember even seeing the patient. Like, who did you see? I'm like, I don't remember. So yeah, that's when I knew that my memory issue was more severe and I needed to try and figure out what was going on. And ultimately became not safe for me to see patients because of my mental and physical symptoms. I couldn't lift any patient, you know, I was getting weaker, I was losing weight. You know, a lot of the coworkers were just saying, oh, just eat more, you know, you'll get stronger, and it just doesn't work that way. Like when your body's weak and tired and, you know, fatigued, you can't just eat and get better. And basically I ended up quitting the job, and I became completely bedbound over time due to weakness, due to POTS. My standing tolerance was about 3 minutes maximum before I got dizzy and I had to lay back down. So my sitting tolerance was 1 to 2 hours a day because of the head pressure mostly. I lost the ability to basically read and write. So I remember even trying to study some PT stuff because I was like bored, and that's what I'm used to was, you know, I was like really intense into PT. So I was reading some physical therapy books and I couldn't even comprehend what they were saying. Maybe like a page at a time, and then it just went right over my head. And I saw multiple doctors, nobody kind of knew what to do. I saw multiple infectious disease doctors, and they all basically didn't know what was wrong with me. Some kind of like undiagnosed autoimmune is basically what they said that I had. And for me, that obviously wasn't an answer. So I pushed further for a solution. I pushed. Doctor after doctor was saying, you know, nothing was wrong with me. So finally, I went back to my primary care doctor, and my dad actually heard about somebody on the radio that had Lyme disease undiagnosed. He was an actual MD, and he had a heart infection from it. And it went undiagnosed for years and years. So it was like, oh, so that's when we kind of started looking into Lyme disease, looked into different sources of testing, and ultimately my PCP, I kind of like brought these issues to my PCP, and he ultimately diagnosed me with Lyme disease, mostly based on clinical symptoms, but it was also through a test with IGeneX. My primary care physician basically put me on 3 months of antibiotics, because at this point I was bedbound. I was barely making it into the office to see my doctor without like my mom's help, because I was that weak. And then as soon as I got in the doctor's office, I obviously had to lay down, and I couldn't even sit up to talk to my doctor, because it was so fatiguing just going into the doctor's office. And he put me on first doxycycline, which that actually helped with my head pressure, so I was happy about that. He basically put me on the 3 months of antibiotics, and the 3 months of antibiotics was basically another living nightmare for me. I was happy to be on the antibiotics because I wasn't getting weaker anymore, like physically weaker. I felt like I was literally just kind of like leveling out. Before, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse, and basically I thought I was on my deathbed. I thought I was just going to die because I was getting so sick and no doctor could help me. So these antibiotics were at least a hope for me that, you know, something good can come out of it. If it is Lyme, you know, this will help the situation. Well, there's a little thing called hurricane with Lyme disease, and with, you know, a bunch of chronic illnesses, chronic infections. I was so sick for those 3 months. I mean, I got extremely agitated, had many mood disorders. I fell into severe depression, where I didn't want to live at all anymore. I was over life. I couldn't work, I couldn't do anything, and the thing about me is my family is very oriented towards like productivity and working, which there's nothing wrong with that, don't get me wrong, but for me, like, I couldn't be productive, I couldn't work, like, nobody knew what was wrong, and, you know, I had this Lyme diagnosis, like, are these antibiotics gonna work, like, who knows, like, I was just giving up, like, I was just done with life, because I didn't think there was a point to live anymore. You know, I went to school for 9 years for physical therapy, and, you know, that's what I had my heart set on doing, and I couldn't do that. The antibiotics made my depression worse as well. I was on something called Malarone, and that like messed with my cognition, gave me kind of like auditory hallucinations. I was dealing with nightly. I would be hearing voices in my head at night. I didn't have schizophrenia at all, but I heard things. Banging, loud noises, stuff like that. Yeah, so, and I would also have very gory, bloody nightmares every single night. So, and on top of that, mostly I would take about 5 Benadryl just to get a couple hours of sleep, in between all the auditory noises and stuff like that. I also developed numbness, tingling, burning, stabbing, shooting, pain, basically everywhere. I mean, I had scratch marks, like these, you know, weird looking scratch marks all over my body. The mental aspect of everything kind of wore me down. People that have any kind of chronic illness, I just want to tell you that just because you can't work, just because, you know, you're laid up and you feel like hell and you would do anything to go back to your normal life, or, you know, have a life like you used to, or even just have a life even if you've never, you know, been able to experience stuff that normal kids, able-bodied kids, not normal, can experience, your life is still valuable. You're still worth something. You're not, just because you're not working, just because you're not productive, does not make you any less of a person. You still have value in this world. So I just wanted to add that in there, because I know people dealing with chronic illnesses, it can be extremely hard and lonely, and it's very isolating, because I don't know about anybody else with a chronic illness, but I lost most of my friends. And you really figure out who's there to support you, and a lot of people don't understand it. So there's that. But yeah, just because you cannot work and you're dependent on somebody else does not mean that you are not valuable and you don't have a say. And also, another thing too with chronic illness is I kind of got lost in my illness for a while, and I was defining myself by Lyme disease. Like, oh, I have Lyme disease and that's just it, and I'm a Limey, and that's just who I am, and I can't do anything about it, and kind of like obsessing over it in a way. You don't have to do that. It's extremely healthy to still have hobbies and still have interests. And how I kind of discovered this is I had a friend with Lyme disease who he basically had his vocal cords paralyzed with the Lyme, and he was in a wheelchair. Well, he still lived his life basically pretty normally. Like, he had music interests, he liked to DJ, he liked to do all that stuff, he had a bunch of friends. So he really taught me that even though you have a chronic illness, you can still have hobbies and you can still have a life, basically. So, and I started to actually date again, and decided like life might be worth living. That's another thing too with chronic illness. Please reach out to other people, because other people have been dealing with situations, and you can learn a lot from somebody that's already been through the ropes. To have that mental support and people understanding what you're going through is extremely important. So that almost saved my life right there, becoming friends with this guy that also had Lyme. After all this antibiotic stuff went on, I basically found a Lyme doctor that I went to. He helped me in confidence and was very respectful, and listened to what I had to say, and he treated me actually like a human being. Like all the other doctors I went to basically brushed me to the side saying, what are you talking about? There's nothing wrong with you. You don't have Lyme. Like, why don't you just go home and try and work? And they just weren't getting it. So this doctor actually got me and took my symptoms seriously, and he's a good doctor, they're hard to come by. So, and I'll get into that a little bit later, because I was talking to him about nutritional balancing, and he's totally on board with that too. So yeah, I'm definitely lucky to have him. With him, this is in basically like 2016. We started antibiotics for Lyme disease again, and I was on 3 very intense antibiotics. There's Zithromax, there's Bactrim, and I'm pretty sure Augmentum, I don't know if I'm saying it right. I got extremely sick again. Surprise, surprise. I was in bed again. Not like I got too much better before then, but there was a brief period where I wasn't on antibiotics where I actually felt semi-okay. So I was on these 3 antibiotics. It took me 3 months of hell of hurricane to get anywhere. I was at the point again where I couldn't sit up because of POTS was so bad. I would get dizzy, orthostatic hypotension, stuff like that. But after the 3 months, it broke, and my endurance went up. I just remember having energy again. I could actually think cognitively. I wanted to be more social. I actually tried working, so when I felt better on antibiotics. So I worked at a place that was really close to me. So I started working at the place. Everything seemed okay, but still something was wrong. Like, something was still off. I was still getting a lot of burning in my feet, which is a Bartonella symptom, and I was still feeling extremely weak as well. So something still was not right. cognitive wise, I had to have complete silence. So whenever I was like typing anything, I always had to close the door, or they had to like the other teammates had to leave the room, because I had to leave the room and go in a complete silent place in order to think. So still having sensory issues, but at that time, this was actually, the sensory issues get worse, trust me. I went off the antibiotics because I was losing more weight. I was down to like 115. I weigh 140 now. And that was like a really low for me, and my gut bloating got worse, and I was just feeling weaker on the antibiotics. So I'm like, I need to go off of these. So basically my doctor didn't even advise it, but he agreed, like, okay, it might not be the best idea, but we'll take you off antibiotics. So I went off antibiotics, and surprise, surprise, I completely crashed. I mean, worse than even before. I remember being at work, and again with the brain fog, I just could not think. I literally spent 30 minutes trying to turn on the computer at work because I just couldn't figure it out. And then at this point I was actually in a new relationship, because I said I was feeling better. I found a boyfriend that was extremely supportive, and I'm extremely lucky to have him. I went on some herbals. So, I was saying I was in an herbal protocol. So I basically went on a whole bunch of herbs, for this. It's something called Bunner's protocol. Bunner, I think actually it's pronounced. So I went on this protocol for Bartonella. And again, with the hurricane, I mean, the sensory just got so bad. Noise, at this point now my gut was messed up from the antibiotics. I had severe lack of basically any kind of gut motility, and this is about like what, end of 2016, beginning of 2017. I was starting the extreme bloating. I remember there was a time, this basically lasted like a year. I mean, it was just completely torture. My sensory got worse, my brain fog got worse, my fatigue got worse, and then it got to the point where last winter I had to sit in a dark room for 8 hours a day and meditate. Any kind of clang that would happen, like any kind of like a metal clang, or kind of like keys jangle or something like that, or a pot being put away, my brain would just feel like it was exploding. Like I couldn't take any noise, and with that I couldn't take any light. We kind of found out through my doctor that I was eating a lot of like chicken liver, and I was actually having vitamin A toxicity. And now that I think of it, being on the nutritional balancing program, it probably had a lot to do with copper overload, because in liver there is a high amount of copper. And iron. I also have an iron problem. So all these things in the organ meat were contributing to all my excessive neuroexcitation, sensory stimulus, And all along this, I do want to mention that I've had extreme insomnia, a lot of pain at night. Taking 2 hour to 3 hour baths per day, salt baths, so I can sweat about 7+ pounds to basically help with the pain, with detox, with being on these herbs. At this point, I'm on like 30 to 40 different supplements. Herbal wise, some viral things, there's some probiotics, and there's some minerals, vitamins, but a lot of it was herbs. I was on like 15 different herbs. And I did this slowly over time. So I added in 1 drop of 1 herb for like a couple weeks, and then I did another, and then I could see how I could tolerate that. And I did make improvement on that. I'm not gonna lie, I made improvement on the herbs. Last winter was the worst. I couldn't tolerate any sensory noise whatsoever. My agitation and rage was so severe that I couldn't talk to anyone for months. I mean, I couldn't even have a normal conversation without. I remember my aunt calling, and I just chopped her head off basically, because I was in such an agitated state. My nervous system was so wired. Nobody knew what to do. It was just getting to the point where it was really bad. Well, luckily we figured that stuff out about the chicken liver. I cut out the organ meat. Things got a little bit better. We cut out a couple of herbs that were contributing to the neuroexcitation factor of everything, and that helped a little bit. Now, around the same time, I was like kind of researching mold-related illnesses. So I was thinking that possibly mold had to do with some of my illnesses and chemical sensitivities. I get extremely sick with chemicals, especially when my body's so sensitive. I could just taste chemicals in my mouth all the time. So between possible mold infection, which nobody knows if that's what it was or not, possible mold, and the chemical sensitivity, the counselor recommended that I move in with my boyfriend. So kind of that's where I'm kind of at today. This happened last about July that I moved out. Automatically, when I was in a new environment, the stress went down. I got basically 50% better. Moving in with my boyfriend was amazing. I was more independent. I was finally able to go to the grocery store, do stuff like that, fix my own food. You know, I could have a mess in the kitchen and clean it up the next day. It like wasn't a big deal. And at home, I was always on edge about having to clean up everything right away and, you know, have the house look perfect. And that's just kind of like how my mom is. I also started seeing a naturopathic doctor who helped me out a little bit about the mold situation and candida. So she was putting me on a couple things for that. And that was very beneficial as well. But I still wasn't getting to the point where I could leave my place for more than like an hour. I was having still severe gut bloating, severe kind of like this urge to always go to the bathroom. Like I went to the bathroom over basically 40 to 50 times a day because I always had bladder pressure. So I couldn't go anywhere. Like I couldn't do anything. And it was the bladder pressure, like it was also like weakness too, like the muscle in there. So it was just like, yeah, it's just like a horrible experience. And it kept me almost like housebound for like a really long time. I mean, this has been going on since last July, 2018. That's kind of like what, and also like to go with the stomach issues, like my stomach has literally been rock hard for close to a year, like literally, and it looks like I'm pregnant. Like, and it is the most painful thing I can't even tell you. As soon as I eat something, like it just sits there like a block and doesn't move for like maybe about 4 or 5 days. Whatever I eat just sits there. So obviously my migrating motor complex went kaput somewhere in the root, and whether that's bacteria, whether it's damaged, whether it's nerve damage, vagus nerve damage, whatever, I don't know what it was, but something was going on there, and it was completely miserable because every time I ate food, I got so fatigued because then at this point I had, you know, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth because I was basically storing food up in the small intestine because it wasn't moving through. So candida, like SIBO kind of thing I was dealing with for about a year, and those have been my main symptoms, but it's like everything is so debilitating. And the fatigue after I eat, like I almost got to the point where if I had to go grocery shopping or I had to leave the house or I had a doctor's appointment, I could not eat before I even left the house because of the amount of fatigue I would experience and the amount of like brain fog I would experience after eating. It just wasn't a possibility. So this went on for about a year. Over the winter, this last winter, it got pretty bad. My bloating got worse. I think the lack of sunlight had a lot to do with my symptoms getting worse. I was still on herbals, doing all that stuff. So eventually I started looking up coffee enemas because I'm like, okay, like I am willing to do it all to help with these stomach issues. And by the way, at this point I've also started to do cooked vegetables in the Instapot. I was already on kind of like the paleo. I was doing like the autoimmune paleo protocol for a while. And that involved like organic grass-fed beef, and I like did a ton of research in this stuff because, you know, obviously my gut is the main issue, so I was trying to correct my gut by doing an elimination diet. That's where I actually started this to back up. I started this when I was at home, and that's where the chicken liver stuff happened, and, you know, I got too sick with the chicken liver, so I had to take that out. Anyways, speeding up to this, I started just doing cooked vegetables when I was here. A lot of root vegetables. I would avoid FODMAPs. just due to the SIBO, and I couldn't tolerate it. It made my bloating worse, made everything more painful. So like onion, garlic, I would try to avoid. Even broccoli or Brussels sprouts I kind of had to avoid for a while, which sucks because those are great veggies. Asparagus I would have to avoid, you know, all the FODMAPs. So I still did cook vegetables, mostly radishes and root vegetables, and that was great. But I still had the stomach issues, you know, that it wasn't solving. Diet alone was not solving my stomach, you know. And IBS is something, I just didn't feel like if I went to a gastroenterologist, like that they would do anything, because it was clearly like a case of IBS, you know. My Lyme doctor isn't really the best with gut, like that's, he knows things. He's an extremely intelligent man. Gut wise, I was still suffering though. The ND knew a little bit more, but nothing was still completely resolving with what they were giving me. I tried a bout of colloidal silver. The colloidal silver I thought was this magic drug, and this was only like a month ago, and I was like, oh, this is great, you know, like my bloating actually went down for the first time with the colloidal silver, and aloe. But then after a while, and I had it actually made me wired. I got extremely wired off the colloidal silver. I wasn't able to sleep. I was having severe nightmares. My sleep paralysis came back. That was another symptom that I didn't mention, but sleep paralysis is huge. When I would try to wake up and my body would still be asleep. And I basically couldn't move anything, but I was basically awake in my mind, but my body was still paralyzed. That would happen to me daily, especially on the colloidal silver. And then when I was out of balance, when I was eating the chicken liver and stuff like that, the sleep paralysis was also an issue. So yeah, with this colloidal silver, I was just getting more agitated, a lot more wired. So I was actually, it gave me energy at first, but then I started to feel drained on this colloidal silver.